All right, so we are going to do a little bite-sized moment today as we go through the taste of annotation, looking at those annotation strategies that are really a part of our third read when we're doing our close reading strategy. We had this PD last week as we just went through some things, and when you think about annotation, hopefully you think a little bit more about color and the active reading strategy for our students. So for this lesson, we started off with an opener, which was our post check. It gave an opportunity for the teacher to see where students felt when it came down to the topic. You can use this as an anticipation to introduce a new topic, or you can use this as a re-engagement to see how well students actually grasp the topic that you presented. When we think about annotations, a lot of people start to think about color because you're highlighting, you're circling, you're using multiple manipulatives to help you with the actual active reading strategy. So the acronym that was given was Teachers Annotating to Support, Tailor, and Engage Our Students. An acronym of TASTE because we had a chance to taste some candy while we were actually doing this professional development. So we use support because we're using the active reading strategy of annotation to support our students with comprehension. We're tailoring the annotation to meet the outcome that we want our students to be able to do after reading. We're engaging our students in the actual process by either having them come to the board, having them share out, but actually having the discourse and the conversation within our classroom that will spark the annotation and comprehension of the reading or the text that they have been given. So our lesson objectives are listed here. And this was a moment for you to think about what did you want to know more about close reading. It's important that when we are doing close reading and we're doing annotation that we're looking at text specific annotation. We're looking at texts that are going to get the outcome that we want students to meet mastery or proficiency of a standard. We're giving them visual representations to support our students. We're allowing them to actually see the annotation happening. We also want student engagement while reading a text. Yes, there's ways to engage students while reading, and it's a piece of being whole group. So allowing students to actually model their reading and hear their reading out loud gives that engagement piece to our annotation process. So when implementing the close reading, the first read part of our read strategy is to read. And the actual reading is a three read. So you're going to read once with your eyes only and just have them kind of preview. The good piece about previewing is because if you already number the text or if you're giving kids an idea of what they're reading, they should be quietly or silently reading on their own so that they can start picking out some of the things that they're going to pick out during annotation, especially if they know that the second read is going to require them to read aloud as a class. That gives them a chance to kind of look at those vocabulary terms that they may not understand, and you might get a different response. When you are doing your second read, this should be a read out loud. This is something that students should be actively participating in. On here and in our PD, we did a popcorn read, which was I might start reading, and the teacher is always, I suggest that the teacher always models the reading aloud of how you want students to read aloud because it gives them a sense of what they should sound like. When you're doing the popcorn read, I would say Spalding, pickup, or popcorn Spalding, which will allow someone to know who is next. And they can stop whenever they feel comfortable. Now, because we don't have students who might be a little shy or might not want to read out loud, you can always pre number the text and chunk it, and then have students decide on what paragraph they want to read. So when they're doing the first read, they're kind of already previewing the text. So in that second read, they are more eager to raise their hand for certain paragraphs because they've already had a chance to kind of preview it aloud, preview before they start reading it aloud. The third read is actually when we're going to start the annotation and see exactly what that looks like. Well, here are some of the annotation strategies that teachers came up with over the course of PD sessions last week. They all are different in their own way, and they show different ideas of what they wanted students to come up with. You can see some questioning added in there, you can see citations added in there. You also can see an example kind of from each content area that would be relevant for you to use when doing annotation. So you can pause this video, take a moment, and just really look into some of these annotations that teachers came up with. We use the one on the left together as we actually did the professional development. So when we were doing this, we were using text or speeches from different people that had different purposes of what we were trying to get our students to understand. And that's how we created those annotation charts that you saw on the last slide. We might have wanted students to understand the vocabulary. Maybe you look at the analogy that was used over another one. Look at if the text was giving us dialogue. Was it trying to persuade us? Was it trying to give us an opinion? Or we can also use this for informational text in science and social studies. Is it giving us a sense of information that we need to understand? What is that information? Are we looking at cause and effect? We also could be looking at direction. We can see different places and pronouns that are actually being used in our excerpt. So when you're doing annotation, think about the outcome first. It's like the backwards model. You want to think about what do you want students to get out of this reading before they even start reading it, right? So before you give them the actual reading, think about what you want them to, what the outcome is. What are you trying to get students to understand? And then when you're creating those annotation posters and you're creating the annotation strategy for that reading, align that to what you want your student outcome to be. After you have completed the annotation, the three read, and the read strategy of close reading, you then go on to that explain. The explain is the E. How are you getting students to actually explain the reading and what you're already talking about? This can be simple as a think, pair, share. If we were using speeches like we were here, you might prompt the question, how do you feel about this speech in particular? Have students think about it independently, silently. Give them a timer, give them like 2 minutes to just think about it on their own. Then have them pair up with the person next to them and have a conversation about what each other have written in the margin or what they annotated and what they've done. And then have them share. Call on those students who are engaged, but also those who might have not been as engaged and did not get the same things out of the reading as others. But the think, pair, share strategy is a great one to use when you're trying to get students to explain their thinking and comprehension. When we think about analyzing, we should be thinking about breaking it down. And it should add context to whatever it is that we're getting students to do. So give us the outcome, kind of give us an idea of how students interpret what they're doing. So for this analyze, they were given speeches, but we also went through the 5 W's. It's a great way to analyze. It's quick, it's fast, but it gives you some context. We wanted to know who was the person actually giving the speech, what was it genuinely about? So that's the comprehension or the summary. When was it given? Where was it given? And why? Your why can lead you into that do. It can give you it can allow students to actually do a summary or do a writing piece that you want them to have based off of the reading that they were given. Last but not least to our read strategy is the do. That can be determine and do. You either want students to determine something or you want them to do an action of something. When we think about the do, let's think about product. What is the actual product? What are we asking students to do in the end? Is it going to be a final assignment? Is it going to be a extension? Is it going to be an independent practice that they're actually doing? So for our do during this lesson in particular, it was for teachers to create an annotation strategy based off of a reading that they were given. So they had to go through the strategies again and figure out which one was best for their students. But for your students, you can do this in any way as you want the product to align with the reading. So let's say that we did a reading and an annotation on a recipe, and we've allowed students to go through and highlight the measurements and underline all the ingredients. And then maybe they had to write in the margin ingredients that they might have not known, or timing. They had to circle the timing of each ingredient. So if we were doing a recipe and we had to figure out how we wanted to annotate it and break it down, the actual do of the reading of the recipe and the annotation of the recipe, the actual do will be us actually maybe baking the cake that we have went through the recipe and annotated. So when we're baking that cake and we're going through the process, the product of the cake being baked is our do. That is our product. That is giving us a representation of what we have already went through and annotated. Then we can see, well, where did we go wrong? Those after reading questions, those after doing questions, to see where students might need assistance, where there might have been some misconceptions, where it might be a student didn't know the difference of a tablespoon and a teaspoon. And so therefore, when they were actually making the cake or baking the cake, they failed to put in the right amount of that ingredient. And that's something that we can see as a teacher and go back and actually assess and help students along the way. All right, so my hope is that this presentation gave you a little bit more of a deeper dive into annotation or a recap from what we already have presented in person. Thank you so much for listening and going through. Hopefully that you are implementing annotation at another level now that you have received this professional development. And if you ever want me to come by and see it, feel free to just let me know. Send me an email, book an appointment with me, and I'll be glad to come out and see you in action. Thank you so much, Touchdown.